today in our boasted modern civilization, we are facing just exactly the same problems, just exactly the same conflict between two schools of philosophy that they faced in the earliest days of America.
George, it's so bad. And when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. The governor of New Jersey says that they have asked for help. So now state police in New Jersey are going to protect Washington, D.C. It's hard to believe.
Tom Yamas, thanks very much. Let me bring in Senator Jeff Merkley this afternoon. Senator, we showed that picture you had taken or you had obtained of the staffers protecting the Electoral College ballots. We're showing it again right there. Remarkable that had to be done.
Watching the U.S. Capitol get invaded by Americans claiming to be patriots, I was confused. Throughout nearly every network covering the event, panels were being hosted to explain where it all came from. Unprecedented gets thrown around a lot. Unprecedented times, unprecedented president, unprecedented precedent. You've heard it all by now. And almost because of this, networks, not really to their own fault, had nowhere else to go. And so when describing this rally, fighting for white supremacy and Trumpism, all you heard was unprecedented. However, while yes, Americans storming the Capitol like they're trying to recreate Lord of the Flies is relatively unprecedented. This messaging and hatred that fuels these events, though, it's nowhere near unprecedented. In fact, it's arguable that the US exists exactly because of it. See, as many Americans are becoming more and more aware of, the US has a complex relationship, to say the least, with white supremacy and today's tool of white supremacy, neocolonialism. Because establishing the entirety of white supremacy, colonialism, and just general cultural genocide would be about 4 hours for a 10-minute video, we won't. But neocolonialism and its immediate historical roots, including US presidents and the reasons for war, has now reached the Capitol building. So where do we start? Disclaimer. As long as people have considered themselves quote-unquote white, in my opinion, white supremacy has existed. The term neocolonialism was first used after World War II by Kwame Nkrumah, an influential Ugandan politician. It describes the control of less powerful nations by more powerful nations through indirect needs. So, while European nations used to set up faux governments and rule with force, after World War II and the global distrust of imperialism set in, they had to adapt to continue the theft of African labor, land, and resources. This led to what's known as dependency theory, in which says that the global economy structure has wealthy countries at the center and poor countries at the periphery. This causes a controlling of poor countries by the wealthy countries to steal resources, wealth, and humans. The theory claims that, quote, poor countries, unquote, are almost uniformly labeled so due to their own colonial past, never being given the opportunity for true freedom. This theory is what has positioned organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to continue giving aid to formerly colonized nations in return for mineral rights. And this resource extraction is truly the meat and potatoes of neocolonialism. It is how the West directly affects Africa without, quote-unquote, directly affecting Africa. During the Cold War, both the USSR and the US actively were investigating in politically what they referred to as satellite states. This, of course, led to proxy wars, or when two countries fight through other countries. And when fighting proxy wars, the US never quite cared about who they propped up, as long as it was opposite to whomever received Soviet support. This meant oftentimes that a democracy in the United States would be propping up an authoritarian ruler, just so that they could control the resources. And this recklessness led to Gamal Abdel Nasser, the then leader of Egypt, to publicly accuse the United States of propping up governments which contradicted both the values of the United States and the interests of the American people. Later, this threat came to fruition as Chairman Mandi bin Barka, leading the Cuban Tricontinental Conference, recognized officially that anti-colonialism was the means for colonized people to achieve self-determination. This is essentially the ability for Africans to be left alone to their own devices, and unsurprisingly, made the U.S. very upset. Following this exchange, Chairman Barka headed the Commission on Neocolonialism, which determined that as the hegemon of the West, the U.S. was the primary perpetrator of neocolonialism, advancing the continued suppression of African wealth and pan-nationalism. Because of this, an American economist by the name of Jeffrey Sachs published recommendations that, quote, all African neocolonial debt be dismissed and a no-repay policy be implemented. This is in excess of 200 billion United States dollars that Africa owes to the West because they were colonized. To quote, the time has come to end this charade. The debts are unaffordable. Without allowing nations to build independent economies, of course they're going to look like the men's U.S. soccer team. Incompetent. But if we back off and leave Africa alone for once, the world will witness typical nation creation, as it would anywhere else in the globe. The modern argument for neocolonialism is regarded as the benevolent imperialism theory. In this, propagated by scholars such as Joseph Nye, the U.S.'s influences come not from the fear of its economy or military, but through what's known as, quote, soft power, to us political scientists at least. Soft power describes the nation's ability to impact foreign countries without any direct action upon them. So, because Apple is headquartered within the United States and was founded in the United States and employs primarily American engineers and designers to make all of its product and propagate its services, when foreign young people or business people buy Apple products to service their workplace or their private needs, they're including the dogma of the United States and capitalism into their daily lives. And through that, the United States supposedly can influence foreign populations and eventually leaders. And the argument for soft power asserts that the influence from the United States is inevitable, stating that the international cultural control the United States enjoys is an unavoidable aspect of regional hegemony. And truth be told, in a fanciful universe, maybe this argument could hold water. You would just have to disregard the hundreds of years of policy in favor for the moral side of the United States story. However, with respects to Joseph Nye, quote, soft power is just a bad argument here. Attempting to justify the continued exploitation of Africa and other colonized peoples is to justify governmental racism, and the hands-off approach to complex affairs is the real issue. The United States would rather not address racism because it doesn't want to. This attitude is certainly not unprecedented. Through soft power, it has continued its hands-off approach to racism, which has now allowed events such as Charlottesville, George Floyd, and the invasion of the Capitol to occur, the United States Capitol. And now Trump and many elected Republicans are furthering this hate, inciting mobs to overturn democracy, ignoring a pandemic for political advantage, and actively promoting racism. So no, nothing here is really that unprecedented. It's just affecting us all now. Neocolonialism must end, racism must end, and yes, Trumpism must end. For the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.